Welcome back to Let Us In podcast. This episode's dropping in cozy season. So, what better time to talk about book to film adaptations? And in this episode specifically, we're going to talk about Stephen King.
In this episode, you guys learn that Crystal and I don't know how to read. We are
What?
literally.
I read all the time, you
Like,
guys.
Crystal can read.
Oh my
Okay,
god.
all right, I'm sorry. I just didn't want to be alone. I don't know how to read.
Again, trying to drag me down with you. Man, this happens every episode.
What is your guys' favorite Stephen King novel that you've read?
The Shining.
The Shining?
Mine actually isn't even a horror book. It's The Green Mile.
Oh, great book.
Mine's The Stand. That's my
Oh.
favorite.
Yep.
I love that one.
Mine's
It's a
Carrie.
great one.
Carrie's a good one too.
His first
Yeah.
book.
I'm Crystal, aka Creepin, it's spooky.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I exist. Person that talks too much. Hi, I'm Emma, aka Emma of the Impact.
And I'm Justine, aka JustineUFF. And today we have a special guest, Horror Chronicles. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Sydney, aka Horror Chronicles. I'm so excited to be here. I'm just happy to be part of this.
It's not like you're just like one of the biggest horror TikTokers
Oh
ever.
my god. It's, again, this was all accidental. I don't know how I got here. I just like to talk about stuff that I love and people just listen to me. I don't know.
So if you guys
Fun.
don't already know Horror Chronicles on TikTok, who are you? Now I can really gatekeep
What
are you
something.
doing
right?
here?
What are you doing
Like,
here?
how did
Who
you
are you?
judgment? But like, how did you find us if you don't know who she is?
Right.
How does that
Yeah.
happen?
How does it work?
Stop.
I love it. I love supporting our fellow horror creators.
Is there
Yeah,
any projects
we
that
love
you're working
support.
on right now?
So I'm actually in talks with a couple people about being a producer on a couple different horror movies. So I just read a couple scripts.
Yes.
One specifically I am like super behind because it's actually starring David Howard Thornton,
Nice. Oh,
Yep.
is that the one with
Art
horror
the Clown
talk show?
himself.
Yes,
Very
the Indiegogo just started for that, right?
Yes, it's called The Dead Place.
That's exciting.
Amazing.
Yep, and the script is incredible. I wouldn't do anything that I like don't actually believe in. Like I would never lie on TikTok. Like I actually just turned down somebody today because I got an email saying, "Hey, can you promote our like Halloween Ends vinyl record?" And I was like, "No, I've just slandered that movie for days and I hated it."
Yeah.
Yeah,
They're like, "We'll pay
that's
you."
really fair.
I'm like, "Nope, I'm good, thank you." I'm not gonna lie. I'm not out here lying. I will only promote things that I like believe in, and like this script is incredible. So very happy about it. Looking forward to
Well,
that.
that is exciting. So we already talked a
Yes.
little bit about like our favorite Stephen King novels. Now you started your TikTok specifically around horror books, right?
I'm trying to think of what my first video was that blew up. When I first started, I was just like putting stuff up about anything and everything. And I do
Fair.
remember one of the first ones that I put up was a Stephen King book. But yeah, I don't even remember honestly how it happened. It was like a year ago, and then all of a sudden within a month I had 10,000 followers, and here we are.
Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like the first video I saw of yours was around horror books, and I was starting to get into book talk, and I was starting to embrace. It was at the very beginning when I started following you, I think, like of my TikTok inception. Once I got on there, I was like, all right, there's horror people on here. This is my jam. I
Right.
like this. Yeah, and I started to reach out to more like horror book people because I wanted to read more books, because once you start talking about horror, people want to ask you about horror books. I'm like, I don't read those except for Stephen King, but I'll look into it.
Sure.
Sure.
Nonfiction, I've got a long list because I'm obsessed with horror movies so much. It just translates into the books.
Have you
Yeah.
ever read the book House of Leaves? I would say that's like
Oh my
one-
god.
It's a chore. It's a chore.
What a
delightful
doozy of a
one.
book.
That book
Yeah.
freaked me out though. That book scared the crap out of me. I stopped reading horror for a while because it was so immersive.
Yeah.
I was scared, genuinely scared reading that book. I could feel things behind me in the shadows.
Just like the
it really got me.
anxiety. Oh my god. Yeah, that was something. It took me like 4 months to read that book, and I usually like fly through books, but it took me months because I had to like put it down and like process.
Take
Yeah,
it
I
in.
had to
Speaking
use
of-
sticky notes. That was the first time I had to use sticky notes in a book to remember
Yeah.
like where the footnotes took me and like go back and
It
like
was a job.
on.
It was literally a
was.
full-time job reading that book.
What's
Yeah.
the term for it? There's a certain term for that kind of writing, and it's similar to E. Cummings. I can't remember what the term is. I wish I knew. I didn't know House of Leaves was going to come up. There's a term for it.
Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. You should be sorry you brought up a book and I don't know
How
everything
dare
about
I?
it. How
Okay,
dare
what
you?
What
So
was your
rude.
guys' first Stephen King film adaptation that you watched? Do you remember?
I
I
don't
think mine was
remember.
Misery. I think
I
mine
was
was
gonna say
Misery.
Misery also. I can't
Yeah,
remember.
I
Or
think-
actually,
Carrie, I
no,
think,
I'm
for
lying
me.
to you. It was definitely the original It.
Same.
Carrie.
Same. It was the
Mm.
original It miniseries. Carrie, for you again.
No, it wasn't for me.
I'm a big
Oh,
Carrie
Love
fan.
Carrie.
Okay, so the It miniseries. Did you rewatch it as an adult and think, what?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I did.
Absolutely. I think I watched that movie when I was like, I don't know, 5 years old maybe. I have a debilitating fear of clowns because of that movie, because of Tim Curry.
Yeah.
But
I
like,
love clowns. I love
oh
them.
God, you're sick.
I am
You're
sick.
But like I look back at it now and it's definitely I did a TikTok on this recently. It's like 4 hours long.
Yeah.
And there's so many, and you
Yeah.
can tell it was like a mini series because there's so many parts that could have been cut out. And I don't think it's necessarily kept up as well as like we may have remembered it from our childhoods.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
don't think
that
so at all.
traumatized me. No.
Yeah.
I remember the spider scene as a kid was not nearly. I remember getting to that point in the miniseries the first time and thinking, this isn't scary. He's not that scary. And being like completely demystified, right? Then as an adult, like I really can see Tim Curry's performance shining through, but it just doesn't hit for me anymore. It just doesn't.
That's how he laughs.
Yeah.
That's more of Tim Curry and Muppet Treasure Island, but you get the idea.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
it's so tough because like people always want to compare like the Pennywises, but I feel like you can't because they both played
so
like
different.
completely different characters.
Yeah.
One's more of a
Completely
creature,
different vibes.
Yeah. Yeah.
and they're
Yeah,
both
I-
so talented. I'm a big fan of both of them. I
Same.
think that I was numb to being afraid of clowns because I had seen Are You Afraid of the Dark and Zebo the Clown. I want to say Zeppo, but that's the Marx brother, the lesser Marx brother, Zebo the Clown.
Lesser Marx brother.
He is. No, he exists. He's a lesser Marx brother. He was more of a businessman. He's in some of the movies, but he's not
Right.
Harpo. He's not Groucho. He's not
Zebo.
He's Zebo. Like, you think of another clown horror movie, like Stitches, maybe. He's like the Zeppo of like lesser of the clown. He's not bad, but he's still Marx brother, but he's not great. He's not Art the Clown. He's not Pennywise.
Right.
Incredible.
I loved the remakes, both of them. I feel like the second one gets a lot of shit, but I
Alright.
still like it. I thought it was
I
great.
did too.
I shit on the second one. I am one of the people who gives it shit. I do. And
Fair.
it's just because of the ending. Like I just thought that was it was silly. It was just silly.
Yeah.
That's
So
my
it was
biggest
really good
issue
up
with
until
it.
the ending. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think on paper it sounds really good. Like they're overcoming their trauma and their fear and they're like being the victors and standing up to this clown like they did those bullies with the rocks when they were kids. I can understand on paper that sounds really good. Execution wise, it's a little
I agree.
cheesy.
And it's like, oh, you have to do is shit talk him to death this whole time. How embarrassing for everybody involved.
How embarrassing.
Yeah.
So embarrassing.
But
Have you
the
guys
creature
read the
does- Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yes.
You get you know the
Boys.
characters so well. Yes, we can mention what everyone likes to mention, the child orgy or whatever, but it's
That's
just,
the one part everybody flocks to, and it's like very weird to me.
Yeah.
like, why are
It's
you
like the
so
main
obsessed
Why
with
does everybody
this?
always want to talk about it?
Because
Yeah.
I remembered it be existing, but I never really thought about it too much. Not in any good or bad way.
It's not like
It's
super
just-
graphic either.
It's a really good example of how Stephen King really puts you into the minds and spaces and personalities of each character. It's a really
Mhm.
that's one of the that was one of the first Stephen King books I read, along with The Dark Half, which I haven't seen The Dark Half in the movie in a while, but you
I
really
haven't
get
seen
to
that
know the
one.
characters and care
I
for
haven't
them.
either.
And I remember The Shining was another early one. One of the moments in a book of Stephen King's that really sticks with me is in the very beginning of The Shining when Torrance is thinking about his sobriety. He's thinking
Mhm.
about how Danny, as a toddler, had strewn all his papers everywhere, and he grabbed him and
Broke his
he's
arm.
drunk and he grabs him and broke his arm, and how heartbreaking it is, and how heartbreaking it is for the character. And maybe we can go right into The Shining. I don't know if you guys are ready.
I'm ready.
And I am a
almost ready.
big fan of both the Kubrick film and the Stephen King book, but I think that's a good example of what is a good adaptation of a book. Even though it's a good movie, is it a good adaptation of the original work? And I would say it's not a good adaptation because
Yep.
Jack Torrance is crazy right away. He doesn't get his redemption in the end.
There's no development.
So there's so much lost.
It's a big thing when it comes to adaptations of other art. People are very much in love with like popular art. You take a risk that you're going to create something that is going to be divisive amongst the people who have read or consumed the other art. So book adaptations, comic adaptations, those are difficult to do well to make everybody happy. I think Kubrick's The Shining is one of those rare instances where it doesn't follow the source material exactly, yet it was still so widely accepted and loved to this day.
Kubrick already had a name, so that's a big part of it.
And that's why.
Stanley
Yeah.
Kubrick.
Yeah,
It
also a
is
great
an
film.
almost
Like,
perfect movie, I will say. I know that not everybody agrees, but I love that movie.
yeah. So I'm surprised you haven't
So-
brought
You're
up
allowed
my
to
rating
disagree
yet.
with me. Everyone,
My thing with it is if you look at it as a separate entity from the book, it's a good
Mhm.
movie. I watched that movie way before I read the book, and I had always liked it. And the reason I like it as much as I do is mainly Jack Nicholson's performance. Like, that's one of the greatest performances ever put on screen.
Yeah, and Shelley Duvall.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Shelley. But
for
then
sure.
But then once I read that book, I think that's when I started looking at the movie and I was like, oh, this actually really isn't what I thought it was, because it's so vastly different. And again, if you look at it separate, it's good. But if you look at it as a comparison, like, Kubrick completely missed the mark with what Stephen King was trying to do. And
Right.
Stephen King wrote that book in the height of his own alcoholism and like based Jack Torrance on
Exactly.
himself. I
Yeah.
think that's why he hates the movie adaptation of The Shining so much too.
so personal.
It's so personal, and like he wrote it from the perspective of an alcoholic father who's struggling to keep his family together, and that's the character development of Jack. And obviously, like, hotel drives him mad and he spirals back down into his alcoholism. But like Emma said, like in the movie, Jack Torrance is crazy right from the rip. There's no development. You don't see that.
It's one of the reasons why they go to the Overlook Hotel, in fact, was for him to heal.
Yeah.
And them to isolate. It felt like in the beginning they had too many people aware of their problems. And they were like, we gotta get out of here.
Jack.
Yeah. I struggle with Kubrick's characters, period. I feel like
I
most of his
agree.
characters are very one-dimensional from beginning to end of his films. That's okay. His films, the focus is the struggle
I
or
wouldn't
the
say
monster.
Joker's one-dimensional. Let's not degrade Matthew Modine ever on this podcast and his perfect hair.
That's fair.
To me, it's just that's the only reason why it gets 4 stars, not 5 stars, is because to me the characters are
opposed
just
to
not
Top Gun,
there.
the
Opposed
new
to,
one.
yeah, Top Gun Maverick is a 5-star film. It's fantastic.
I haven't seen it
Five-star
either.
film.
I
It is
can't confirm nor deny.
For what it is, they're 2 different movies. Like whole different categories, whole different judgment coming from me. They're always gonna give me shit for this, so it's okay. It's okay.
It's all right.
Any of you guys seen the miniseries, the Shining miniseries?
I haven't seen the miniseries.
You haven't seen it. Emma's seen it.
I have.
Justine hasn't seen it. So if you guys want an exact representation of the book, an exact adaptation, you need to watch the miniseries. However, the miniseries lacks the like magic for me. Like the Kubrick version, it always freaked me out. I watched it really young. It was scary to me. The hotel was magical and maze, and there was just something very mesmerizing to me about The Shining. But then the miniseries, while it follows the book literally to a T, like down to certain lines are spoken the exact same, pulled from the book. Little details exactly the same. Like in the book, they get a turkey in the freezer and it's like wrapped in a bow, and like that's in the miniseries. Like it's everything is
And the
identical.
topiaries.
The oh, okay. I've got the topiaries
You have a whole
suck. I
thing
hate the
about the
topiaries.
topiaries.
They suck. They are okay. So this is my issue with the miniseries though, is because the visual effects are so bad and the acting is very mediocre. And so it
Mm.
doesn't live up to that like masterpiece in my mind that is The Shining.
I feel like with that though, if that's the case, like they knew that because Stephen King worked on the miniseries, I think, right?
He did.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I feel like he hated The Shining so much that they like tried to make something that was an exact replica of the book. And I don't think you have to do that to make a good adaptation. I
Yeah,
just
I
think you
agree.
have to have like respect of like your source material, which I don't
Yeah.
necessarily think that Kubrick had.
Who did have it?
Stephen
Mike
King.
Flanagan.
Oh, our
Well,
Mike
that
Flanagan.
was
Stephen
going to be
King-
something I was going to say. I was going to say I want the miniseries to
Sorry.
be remade by Mike Flanagan.
By Mike
because
Flanagan.
I want to see like a Netflix series. I don't care what he puts it on, but I want to see a miniseries of The Shining by Mike Flanagan. And I'm hoping he
entirely
sees
agree.
this video. Let's tweet
Mike
him this
Flanagan-
video.
Mike Flanagan, if you're watching, get
If
on
you're
it.
watching,
That is
Also, I'll
yes,
love
we're
you
Flanagan
so
stans.
much. You
We
do no
do.
wrong.
Woodman
Literally
and
no wrong.
Stephen King
Yeah.
are humanists, and Kubrick was not. He
Mm.
did not believe in
True.
humanity, and that's apparent
Yes.
in all of his films.
I'm gonna be honest
and-
with you guys. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I'm a huge Stanley Kubrick slanderer.
I'm a
I
Stanley
do
Kubrick
not like the man.
fan and
Yes.
slanderer. I think there's a balance.
I don't like
There's that
anything he's ever
Are you
done.
gonna tell me that 2001 has way too long of an ending? I'm beginning
It's
and
trash. I hate the whole thing. I told you I
So
was gonna
fun.
ruffle feathers
I'm
today.
so happy.
I'm not
you're
even
here.
a huge Kubrick fan, honestly. I'm not even like a massive Kubrick fan. I just really love The Shining, and I think it's just
That's
because
it.
it's one of my first things. Like, yeah, I'm not like a
Oh, Em, I'm
like a
sorry.
stan. I'm sorry. Emma.
sorry.
Sorry, like,
Yeah.
nothing.
I will
Dr.
give him. I will.
Strangelove, no one here likes Dr. Strangelove.
I've never seen it. Can't.
Fuck!
Okay.
What the fuck, you guys?
Oh wow!
First of all, was not on the assignment. Okay.
I'll give him Full Metal Jacket. Full Metal Jacket's a great movie.
Yep.
But
Not as
I
great
don't
as
know.
Dr. Strange.
Yeah, I was severely impacted by Full Metal Jacket. That's
Yeah.
also like 2 movies. It has such a huge tone shift. Like, it's bizarre sometimes. Anyways,
Yeah.
perfect still, but it's
Off
alright.
topic.
So I feel like Kubrick is also kind of film bro-y, and Emma is our resident film bro. Like,
That explains a
That's
lot.
true.
Being the resident film bro, I don't want to, but I can't help
You
but
do it to
feeling
yourself,
my
Emma.
feelings.
you did it to
I
yourself.
don't think he's perfect. I don't think he was very good with actors, especially actors that weren't specifically British actors. He thought that they had a better method in a way where he was snobby about it. There's a lot of flaws to Kubrick, and I like stories that have humanity from humanitarian like Flanagan or Stephen King. He's had an impact on the way film has been done and the way things have been shot. It's had an impact on cinematography in particular that I think can't
Yeah.
be ignored, as a film bro would say.
Oh, I
Uh,
do agree with that. As I think
Yeah.
the horror genre generally gets that luxury to a degree because it doesn't get luxuries. So they tend to have to
Yeah.
be more creative, innovative to translate very mystical things onto screen in a believable way. And he nailed it with The Shining is one of those films that does hold up. It holds up today. I know that some people who haven't seen it and go back and watch it, there's a few people that say it's boring, but I don't think those are people who love cinematography necessarily. They
minute.
tend to be
There are
people
people
who
that say, "Oh my
consume
god,
film.
the film bro in me is about to like have an aneurysm." People think The
It's a
Shining is boring.
it's a
So many people
perspective
do.
thing.
Yeah.
You got to understand what people
That's
like.
fine. It's fine.
People
That's
who
totally
like my opinions
okay.
are people who consume commercial cotton candy garbage like I do. So
I love cotton candy garbage. Street Trash is one of my
know, but,
favorite
like-
horror movies. I love melt face
I'm
horror.
talking commercial cotton candy.
Commercial
Think of the
cotton
people
candy.
that like, yeah, like those. Myself, I'm one of those people. I like my
So you're not
commercial
watching
cotton
ants,
candy.
okay?
But like, also consume a lot of very fancy film. I don't fucking know what it's called.
Fancy
Not
film.
elevated.
Let's say prestige. But, okay, so okay. Before I do want to make a comparison between the miniseries of The Shining and The Shining, but what we say as elevated horror prestige is what they used to call the ambiguous term of it's not a horror film, it's a psychological thriller.
Unplug yourself.
Remember, that's it. That's always it's not a horror film. It's a psychological thriller. And now this new term has come along, elevated horror. But before that term or prestige horror, it's a psychological thriller. Excuse me, Silence of the Lambs is a psychological thriller, that kind of stuff.
That's why it won Oscars. They wouldn't
but,
brand it as a horror.
There's so many, but the Oscars can go fuck themselves. Stephen King wrote a memoir about writing, which if you listen to Jordan Peele, especially Ty West, Mike Flanagan, all of them, they all mention this book, and it makes me want to get it. I don't know why I haven't, just lazy. He mentions 3 levels of scary. There's the gross out, there's horror, which horror is when you're presented with the gross out. I think is, you don't have to explain that. Get it. Yeah, you get that. Everyone gets that, which is the lowest form, but delicious. And then for me, I love it. Are you kidding?
Wait, these are legitimate levels? We're talking like one.
I'm about to come out of the closet as like a super big Saw fan, so let's not get into that. And that's not even really gross.
Not at all.
No,
What's
amateurs? Are we amateurs
right?
here? Anyway, it feels so nice to be around other horror fans. Oh my god. I mean, I wouldn't say that to somebody otherwise. I know everyone has their limits, and I respect everyone's limits. So the gross out, the horror, which is being faced with the unimaginable, like if we see it doing something like turning into a spider with a head, a giant clown head, and then the terror. The terror is when the audience fills in the unknown, and we feel our own dread within.
Ambiguous.
The meat
and
hook.
I feel like
Texas Chainsaw meat hook.
Yes, we actually never see. It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
You're so great on here. I love it, and that's one of my favorite movies of all time.
Yeah.
And there's so much that is just left to the imagination. Of course, one of my favorite scenes in that movie is a gross out scene. I feel like the miniseries
the
is
finger?
missing the horror.
We all know. Yep.
I feel like the miniseries is missing the terror, the last stage of horror, where it's like there's this idea of the unimaginable, which I think is very clear in the film. And it's amazing how we are presented with this wide space all the time in the film, but we feel so claustrophobic. We feel so closed in, even in these wide spaces. And it's just how Stanley Kubrick is like the best filmmaker of all time. I'm just kidding. No, it's just it's one of his gifts. It's the flaws he has. That's one of his gifts.
I will give him the fact that cinematography is definitely his strong suit.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to be a cinematographer working under him, though.
Absolutely not.
No.
I wouldn't want to be working under him at all.
That's why Dr. Sleep to me is it's perfect, because he does nail every
recreation.
single one of those. He has moments that are gross, like the baby and the vomit, and like that whole scene is gross. Like,
it is
and
more
then you
upsetting
have-
in the book, though. The part with the baby and the mother.
he cut out a lot of that stuff. A lot of those scenes were edited way more down, especially the baseball boy murder. That scene,
It was originally 30 minutes, right? Something
Yeah.
like that.
King saw it and was like,
He's
no.
like, that scene was a little long. I think that is one of the most gruesome but well done child murder scenes is in Dr. Sleep. That's upsetting.
it's
that
you hear
kid-
the sounds of the
Such a great actor.
and
Such
the
a good actor.
breathing, and the way that they're just like fiending and like writhing, like just,
breathing it in, like they're living off of it.
like
Yeah.
like
Like
it's
you
a
mentioned
drug.
the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. We don't see him being stabbed, but we see the blood coming up onto him, and he's a child. It's upsetting.
And you
It's all you
hear
need.
it. That sound
And
is
he sells
so
it.
intense. Yeah. Yeah.
I heard-
their faces, their look, they looked cool. They're cool looking villains.
Rose
man.
They're like glowing eyes.
Yeah.
So-
Rebecca Ferguson is just
Oh my gosh.
in the book and then in the
Sublime.
movie. That was one of
Yeah.
the rare ones I got to read the book before I saw the movie. And
Yes, me
and
too.
it was hard to pick. It's hard to picture who could be that hot, and then they did it.
and that monster.
She nailed it.
Yeah, she nailed it. One of my favorite attributes of that film is how he proved that it could be done to be able to do a sequel to something so important like The Shining, but also do a sequel to a novel adaptation to what King's works were. As someone who was very much a huge admirer of King, that would be so difficult. And now I feel like I swear that Stephen King would give him any property. I bet.
think
I
so.
bet he
agree.
would give him any property.
I personally believe that Mike Flanagan understands Stephen King better than Stephen King understands Stephen King.
Yeah.
Like,
I
if
From a
agree.
you-
filmmaking point of view, for sure.
yes.
Yeah.
Like, again,
Yeah.
if you, like, I
Because
haven't seen the
Maximum
mini
Overdrive-
trash. He was coked out the whole time. It wasn't his fault.
True.
But if you, like,
Hey.
what you guys said about the miniseries, like, he, like, contributed to that movie and he just made it a direct, literally shot by shot remake of his book, whereas Mike Flanagan like understood the material, took the material, and like you said, made it a
And made a
sequel to
movie.
both like an iconic movie, but also an iconic book. Because like the way that came together and like the whole boiler scene at the end, I'll never get over the
cry
fact how
so
they came
every time
together.
I watch that
Danny
movie
got
too.
the redemption. So hearing an interview with Mike Flanagan, even though he had already done Gerald's Game, which we will talk about too, he had never met Stephen King, like met him, and he got to meet him. And there's this really cute interview where they're sitting next to each other, and Mike Flanagan's saying, reading Stephen King's books where I got really scared taught me how to be brave, and I started crying.
I'm crying right now.
I literally did.
Oh my god.
And they're sitting next to, and then Stephen King puts his hand to his heart. I'm like, oh my god. Like, just,
Also-
oh
They're
my
like
god.
twin flames. Oh my god.
They are.
Flanagan wanting to make a tribute because he loved the movie too, the Stanley Kubrick film, and knew that fans think so much of the film. He really wanted to make a tribute to both. And where have you guys read, all of you read Dr. Sleep, right?
I haven't read Dr. Sleep. No. I've read excerpts while reading about Dr. Sleep. That's
Well,
my
I mean,
basis for comparison.
It goes from like the end of The Shining, so the Overlook is no longer there at the end of Dr.
Yeah.
Sleep. So it's really the third act that was very different in the terms that of the final showdown between Rose and Danny. Ewan McGregor's so good as Danny. I wouldn't have pictured him being that good at it, but he was very good.
He was perfect.
Yeah, so it's those like sad
I
eyes.
cried. That's where I cry the most in that movie. The minute he walks into the Overlook and he's being like transported back to his child, he's remembering things. We're remembering things with him. We're seeing these images. You hear some of the sounds like layered in
I'm
there.
like getting chills right now.
Me too. I
Yeah.
was just thinking that. I was like, I got
And then the
goosebumps.
whole bar scene is so beautifully shot and well done, with this conversation being had with a moving piece of alcohol between them constantly. You could tell it's not just a battle with him and the Overlook or him and his dad. It's him and his addiction and acceptance and all of that. Like, it's just happening in that one scene. And every time, I'm getting goosebumps talking about it again too.
Recovery, the whole Dr. Sleep.
And that's what The Shining was about. Or was supposed to be about. Like the book was supposed to be about.
And I learned this from Emma, that Ewan McGregor was also in recovery.
And
he
Flanagan.
was also
Ewan McGregor,
and
Flanagan, and Stephen King, and they all had been
So that was
sober
very
for a certain
personal.
amount of years.
Yeah.
It was very personal for everyone, and for those three main men involved in that one particular scene.
knowing that and rewatching, because we just did a Flanagan episode, right, with Haunting Season. So we just rewatched a lot of these films by Flanagan, specifically a few Stephen King adaptations. So watching Dr. Sleep again, knowing what I know now from Emma about both of them being in recovery and sober, watching Ewan McGregor do that scene with his dad and that battle with the alcohol is so much more intense, knowing that he has actually had that battle and now is acting it out. That's him. That's so heart-wrenching to watch. Like, it's intense. I don't know.
I feel like I need to go watch it right now again. Now knowing this information.
It's so good. It's so good.
It's so good. Even just like the way that they recreated the hotel, like to a
So
T. Like I
perfect.
heard that they like got the blueprints from Kubrick's estate, like
with the
recreated
addition
it
of the
to a
laughter
T.
glass, of course, which you now
right.
know isn't there. I love that.
I know. But even like the twins, like like Wendy, like everything was so spot on.
So I got to use his acting family for those two characters too, which is cool because like you needed to have characters that could play very iconic characters and actors work, but they were people that he works with all the time already.
Which I appreciate that he does that. I really do. Like Henry Thomas, that's who it is that played Jack. Yeah. It's really cool.
Yeah, and I think the other actress is in a lot of his works too, that played Shelley Duvall's character.
I might have told this story already in our Flanagan episode, but so the third act was the one that was really different, that ended up in the book, and the studio had already passed. Like, you could do what you want, Mike Flanagan. Like, whatever, this script is passed, shoot the script. But he wouldn't do it without Stephen's approval. And Stephen King had read most of it, and he's got heart. They're so cute. Stephen King had read most of it, and he's like, "Oh, my son's getting married. I'm going to a wedding. I won't get to the rest of it." And then Mike's like, "The part that like might maybe like hate, because this is like the parts that's different." So he's like sweating for weeks, waiting to hear back. And then of course Stephen loved it and gave us approval. But Mike wouldn't have done it without Stephen's approval. And we know, I think we can tell from Mike Flanagan that's true. That is true.
Mhm.
Yeah.
He's so sweet.
And Stephen King said after the fact that the Doctor Sleep the movie redeemed The Shining the movie for him.
Yeah.
Imagine getting that compliment. Like, this guy has so
Yeah.
vehemently hated this movie for years, and now he's saying that your movie redeemed
And
it for
he's
him.
your hero.
Yeah,
Ooh,
Yeah.
incredible.
I'd be like, I
I
can
could
retire
cry.
now.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
Like,
that's it.
I
That's
would
all I needed.
retire. I'd be like, I
I'm
can't
done.
top this.
You can never
Done.
watch that.
No.
But then he did with Hill House, of course. So.
Oh, my favorite show of all time. Don't even.
Me too.
Well, it was funny to me that he had not met Stephen King yet, even though he had done Gerald's Game. And Mike Flanagan talks at the time, that was his #1 project. Like, if I never make anything again, that was something to me. But I liked it. But I'm like, her really? I make so many great things. It's good, but it's not
Yeah.
my favorite. of
And we
yours.
talk about that in our Afghanistan episode as well. So if you guys haven't checked that out yet, go check it out.
I haven't read Gerald's Game though,
Fun.
so I can't say.
I've read Gerald's Game. Has anybody else read Gerald's Game?
Yes.
I have not.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I think
Crystal
it's
has.
pretty spot on, but if anything, I actually like the movie better than the book in this case. I just
Ooh.
think Flanagan just like adds something again. I don't know. I think for me it was like watching that degloving scene come to life and watching like the Moonlight Man come to life on screen was so effective. So
Is the eclipse stuff in the book? Because the eclipse stuff in the film, I think, is some of the most beautifully shot imagery.
yes.
It's gorgeous.
It's
not like
even
not like
slightly.
this stuff, but like the.
I think it's
the pretty
slightly
there.
connected to Dolores Claiborne, like another Stephen King work.
I saw this thing that somebody, I don't know, they must have taken hours on this. They did every single Stephen King book and like how they all like
How they're
interconnect
connected.
in
The
the
lines?
universe and stuff.
Yeah.
Oh my god,
Insane.
I couldn't follow the lines. There was so damn many of them. I was like,
No.
I can't
Yeah.
remember which was to
I started
I
reading
love
his
that,
books in order that they came out because like, there's so
Mm.
many connections that
Yeah.
you won't see.
Oh, that's
Like, it's-
smart. That's a smart way to do it. Although
Yeah.
the Dark
True.
Tower gets it muddled because there's so many of them.
I-
Isn't
I've
the
only
Dark
read-
Tower? Yeah, I've read a lot of the Dark Towers stuff.
I've only read to
That
the
I
third
have
one.
read because to me that was much more fantasy based, and I really enjoyed that. But
yeah.
also felt like it was what kind of tied everything together the most.
It
I
is.
thought. Because it's like the underlying universes and how they're all connected and feed into each other, and why these creatures exist in Maine or wherever else.
Right.
Colorado.
Yeah.
Did you guys see that picture of Mike Flanagan and Kate in the Bangor Library recently on Instagram?
No.
No.
I love
They're
them.
so
super
cute.
They're so
They're
cute.
Are they doing a Stephen King work?
It was just one of those casual posts. You know,
They were reading.
Mhm.
Seems
What were they
suspicious.
reading?
hints.
I think it was. I don't know how to pronounce it. I think it's Lizzie's story. However you say
Lizzie's
that.
story.
think
I haven't
Lizzie's
read that
story? I
one.
think that's how they. Me neither. And I
Mm.
think that's what Kate was reading, if I'm not mistaken.
Duffer Brothers were gonna do that.
Wendy's Button
Stephen-
Box.
No, it was a
think.
different one. I thought it was
Oh.
Thunder or something. The one that they read at the end of the last season. Crystal was talking about it. You had read it.
Oh,
Like, a
that's
different-
Talisman.
Yeah.
I
love
literally
that.
feel like nobody else should be touching Stephen King's works except for Flanagan.
It should be
Agree.
But
elite.
but I also want Flanagan to start his own universe like he is. Like with all his
Yeah.
connections with Oculus, the
Oh,
Laughter
yeah.
Glass and
Midnight Mass,
Midnight
the
Mass.
book. Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
all of those connections, I really want him to keep like building that out. I didn't see anything in Midnight Club yet. I have to go rewatch it because I didn't get to
I haven't
look for
either.
the word glass.
so
but I
sneaky.
The
know
Last
it's
of
on
Glass is
TV.
there. Oh,
Yeah.
where? I don't remember which episode the Last of Glass is in, but it is in there. It's
I'm
earlier.
gonna look for it too.
earlier.
I'm gonna look for it. It's probably one of the episodes he actually directed too.
Joe
Anyway.
Hill and Stephen King's it's not what you think. Mesh in together with the True Knot. That the True
Ooh.
Knot exists within Horns, as well as Horns
I like that
and
movie.
Dr. Sleep mix in a little bit, just a little bit.
Interesting.
I love that.
I did not know that.
You guys were
I
so
knew.
ready to be like
the
a
True
King
Knot-
movie.
Black phone.
So we talked a little bit about Misery being one of your first films that you watched or first books.
That was one of my first movies or adaptations
Yeah.
that I saw. Oh my god.
I
That
like
was
a
one of
good
my
scary
first Stephen
movie.
King books I read.
It was actually one of
Okay.
my first books too. Not the first, but it was up there, like maybe second. It was
Yeah.
very early on.
I
Yeah.
think it
Because
was
I
one of
watched
the
that
first-
movie very young too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think it was one of the first films I watched where there was like a woman villain, like an
Mhm.
antagonist that was a woman
And such
as
a good one.
quirky.
the
and-
movie.
Can we talk
Chain
about
a
that?
man to
No,
a
we
bed.
have to talk
Okay,
about
yeah,
that.
sure.
We need to talk about the hobbling scene because spoilers
It's very
for
different in the
anybody.
book.
It's
Yeah.
very different in the
Very
book.
different in the book.
And I wish that they had gone in that direction because in the book, Annie Wilkes full on just chops his left foot
Chops
off
his
with
feet
an
off.
axe and then cauterizes it with a torch instead of just breaking his ankles. And then she also cuts his thumb off with an electric knife. Like she's
Yeah.
violent in the book, like more so than in the movie. I know that they chose not to go that direction because they were concerned about the levels of gore, and there was people that were refusing to be cast in the movie because of that scene. Bette Midler was being considered for the role, but she was like, I don't want to saw somebody's foot off. So people were
Wow.
full on just like not taking on these roles because of the hobbling scene. So they had to reel it back and do a less gory scene. But I wish that they had just gone full tilt because I think that would have made this extreme.
See, I do and
gotta
I
say,
don't.
the sound of his ankles breaking is rough.
It's effective. No, it's effective, and it's
I'm not.
it's still
I
great.
would like to have seen the hobbling scene too. Don't get me wrong. I'm just
Yeah.
saying it was effective what they did do.
I think
I
it's just
just-
people complain about it not being very horror. A lot of people say Misery isn't horror enough, and I'm like, well, the book is. If you read the book, it's
I
The
think
significant.
the
book's
movie
definitely more
is.
horror, but I think the
Mhm.
movie, like what sells it is their performances. Like
Oh,
their
100%.
chemistry, that is such a difficult movie to film. It's one room basically with two
Mhm.
I love
actors.
that
They did
film.
not yeah, like if they did not mesh, that movie would not have worked. The fact that they both like held their own but also just had such great chemistry, like that
Oh.
movie's iconic. And like
It
even the
is, it's
hobbling
so
scene, like you don't have to see a whole lot because like when she breaks his leg and it goes to his face and like that scream and like his veins
Yeah.
are sticking out of his neck, like that's what you need
Right.
and you like feel it.
Oh,
I feel like she's a
so good.
nurse too, and I just
She is
don't
a
know
nurse.
if a nurse would take the risk of cutting a foot off if they could hobble you in a more safe and effective manner
Yeah.
that's not going to have you bleeding out.
If you're somebody
know.
that is thinking of breaking someone's ankles and chaining them to a bed or cutting the feet off,
Mhm.
I don't think you're thinking logically. To
Yeah.
be fair, like I don't think the logic of what's the best way I could do this and
Yeah.
for their safety.
Yeah.
I don't think that's happening.
He
As long
also
as
loves
he can
him.
write the book, her precious book, which that's
Her
the part I
precious
relate to.
book.
Okay, her precious
Yeah.
book, writing about her. What is the name of the character?
Misery Chest.
Misery
Misery.
Chastain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As long as we get that proper Misery Chastain ending or continuation, who cares if he can walk? As long as he's alive
Yeah.
to write it. I think sometimes, even as a person
Oh,
that
yeah.
watches a lot of really disgusting things that I wouldn't suggest to other people,
Same.
yeah, it's just I'm a curious little critter. Okay, I can't help it.
Yeah. I feel
Oh, I
like
agree.
Annie in the book is like you said, Crystal, like much more violent, like
Mhm.
bloody, gory, like chopping off limbs. Like at one point she literally runs people over with a lawnmower or something. Like
Yeah,
she's
she does.
crazy. Movie Misery and like Annie in the movie is much more like psychological. Okay, like I'm going to break your legs
It's
so
a
you can't move.
psychological
I don't
thriller.
even need to tie. Yeah, it's elevated. I don't need to tie you down. I'm just gonna break your legs. Like she's much more psychological, and like I think that's scarier.
Yeah, and she is a little bit in the book with she like punishes him by withholding his medication a lot more. Like he's
Yeah.
addicted to the painkillers in the book,
Yeah.
whereas in the movie they don't really showcase that
No.
much.
That's
There is a
true.
few differences, but oh god, that movie is still so
That's
good.
one of my tops.
Tier,
Yeah.
top tier.
It is
One of my
top tier.
favorite Stephen King films is 1408, and that one is also single set and severely queried by the acting by John Cusack. That film rocks me every single time I watch it. I
Me
don't know
too.
why. I can't tell you why. I literally cannot understand why this film impacts me so much. But every time I watch it, it's like this visceral like sense of the idea of being trapped and tortured in a room for
Yes.
that long just freaks me out. And there's no end in sight. And I swear I've seen 2 different endings on this movie because
There's
I
3.
just rewatched it. Yeah, so I just
There's
rewatched
3.
it the other day, and I swear the purchased version I have had a very different ending than when I watched the other
Yeah,
day.
there's 3 alternate endings.
So
Which one did you see?
The ending I just watched is the one where he ends up getting out and going back home, and him and his wife hear their daughter on his recording device, and it ends.
Yeah.
And the one I remember the most is where he goes and checks the mail and all of the building like falls apart, and you realize that he's
And
still
he's
in
back.
the room.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
that he
That's
didn't
one I remember.
actually get out. I don't remember a third one, but those are the two that I know of.
There's
that I've
another one
seen.
where they go to the funeral, and Olin, like Samuel L. Jackson's character, he goes to the funeral to give the box of stuff back to his wife, and then she
Yeah.
doesn't want it, and then he sees Mike Enslin in the back of his car, and then like sees his ghost walk off with his daughter and stuff. It's actually a really
Ooh.
sad alternate ending.
I feel like I have seen that one
hard.
too.
Now, yeah,
Now
I
that
think
you
I have
mention
to
it.
now that you mention it, because I
Yeah.
do remember a funeral one, and I do remember him with his daughter like walking off while he looks back in the back like that.
The
Okay.
thought
There's some
it's
really
that movie is
sad.
terrifying because the thought again of just like you said, being trapped in this like endless
Mhm.
labyrinth, no end in sight, no way out. That's the scariest thing. It's inescapable.
Yeah.
What do
There's
you do?
such cool
And then
visuals too.
That's why
The-
I like it.
Me too.
Yeah.
That one scene, there is like one visual that gives me like House on Haunted Hill.
House on Haunted Hill.
Yeah, the one scene with the guy who like jumps out the window and he looks all like a old fashioned TV, like that. That gives me
Yeah.
a little bit of that vibe.
Like cheesy
But-
90s.
Yeah, but then there's that like the painting scene where he hits it and like the water rushes out, and like the vent scene where he comes across the dead body.
Ew, and the thing is
it just comes
crawling
alive,
behind him.
and, like,
I hate that part because
Trauma.
that's even more
Trauma.
claustrophobic.
or
Have you
when
guys
he
read the
sees
short story?
himself-
Oh
no, I
yeah.
haven't.
Oh, that's one
I
of my
haven't read it
favorite.
either.
Oh,
Mine
I highly
too,
re-
because
you
it
can find
doesn't-
it online.
He's like not mimicking
Yeah.
him at first, and then all of a
Yeah.
sudden he is mimicking him, and then
Yeah.
he's him,
I
but he
love
looks like an
that.
evil like version of
Like
him.
his face is all
like-
dark. Yeah.
Yeah, he's like wearing a black turtleneck and his hair's slicked
Yeah.
back.
This is actually one movie adaptation that I think is significantly better than the short story, because the short story follows, like, the movie follows the beginning of the short story almost identically, like where Olin is like trying to convince him not to stay in the room, and their whole meeting, that's all identical. But when we actually get to the room in the short story, it's so quick. It's like a couple paragraphs long, and it doesn't really describe much. So when in the movie, we get to actually see all of the crazy shit that's happening. And
Yeah.
it's so much more effective in the movie. This is one adaptation that I will say the movie is way better, like significantly better. I wouldn't even recommend reading the short story, honestly. It's not really worth it.
I don't think I need to, because the film
No.
is one of my favorites,
No,
and I watch
It's
it.
so effective.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is.
How
And
hard?
that's, I was literally just gonna say that. I'm like,
Yeah.
I was just gonna say that's another one where had John Cusack not worked, that character had not been as good as he was, that movie would not have worked. Like being again,
No.
one room, one person acting entirely by yourself, like
Mhm.
talent. People have talent. It's crazy.
He's so
What
good in
happened
that,
to
yeah.
him? I
Yes.
don't understand why he's not in more films, because every role I see him in, he's like 150%.
He's a good
Buy
actor.
it.
Yeah.
He's so good. I used to love
There's a
the
lot
film
of
Grosse
compilations of
Point
him
Blank
in the
too.
rain because he's in in the rain a lot in movies. He's in
Yeah,
the
like
rain.
Identity.
Identity.
Like, exactly.
High Fidelity.
love
There's a
him.
bunch.
Fantastic.
There's enough of them for the compilation on YouTube. So
That's funny. When
Part
people ask
two.
me what the scariest thing I've ever created was, it's this.
I love monsters.
I
Period.
love Monstrous Femme. I love the Monstrous Femme.
Until next time. Bye bye.